Cognition is everything. Without our brains, we are just a piece of meat. We want to highlight and make accessible the impact of cognition in everyday life. Welcome to the Cognitive Tribe. Today's theme is focusing on transformation, which means change and moving from one established position to a new one. We are living in a time when we are experiencing a forceful transformation on macro and micro level, geopolitically and digitally. More than anything, it demands flexibility from organizations and individuals. Speaking of this, we cannot think of a better person than Håkan Nilsson, who manages successful global network consultancy, helping the world-leading logistics companies with digital transformation. Welcome, Håkan. How are things with you?
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here and a pleasure, at least I hope.
I know you're very eager to speak and I can feel you vibrating there on your chair, but we will test your patience here and let you listen to Anders giving a presentation of you to the viewers and listeners. And then maybe you will get an opportunity to reply. So sit back and enjoy.
Håkan is a highly gifted, intelligent, senior, savvy, curious, humoristic, positively childish and energetic person with a big heart and with a lifelong mission to push frontiers, never stop learning, and constantly develop as a person. Håkan's big heart, coupled with intelligence, ability of pattern recognition and verbal flow, supersedes that of most people, and it has also made him a master of meaningful one-liners that he actually can back up. As a professional, Håkan wants to be a positive force to get power from positive people in the forefront of technology. He wants to disrupt with honesty and strives for mastering in the three areas of processes, technology and people. He does so running the tiny giant Zinnovate and is sometimes called OGL, our great leader, by colleagues and partners. Very concretely, his company Zinnovate, with its global network of senior consultants, advises and helps to digitally disrupt and transform some of the world's leading logistical companies. So Håkan,
Wow.
is what a man. Is this a true and comfortable description? What is your comment to this?
The first thought that comes to mind is I want to contract you as a coach to my wife.
That's fine.
My good personality traits. I'm very rarely humble, but wow. I think there were at least a couple of things, though, that that really strikes a chord here. The big heart. At least I try to have a big heart. I think I learned along the way that if you're seeking a life of joy and happiness and success, your odds of getting there goes up dramatically if you are not just focusing on the get part of that, but the give part. I think it's actually virtually impossible to get a great life unless you at least aspire to help other people getting a better life. So maybe that is the good heart, and then aspire to one of the fantastic characteristics on your long list there, Anders. But I think also it's very true if we go to the professional side. Some people will call me a industry veteran in logistics and IT. If they are strong and bold, they call me a veteran. But I think more than anything else, what I've spent most of my professional life is working on big, global, complex change management projects. And if you do that, you learn you usually learn it the hard way, that the absolute most important key success ingredient is the people factor. And in order to move that in a positive direction, you need to connect well in teams. It's not that a set of high performance individuals by definition becomes a high performance team. So I think my focus there has been a lot on that change management aspect to make the whole become more than the sum of the parts. And then you need to be open to give yourself, to praise people, not to take credit for other people's achievements. So I think that that is an important factor. It's not just the joy and happiness and fluffy factor. It is an extremely strong correlation with success that you master change management and the HR, the behavioral factor of these projects.
Moving then from the heart here, maybe to the mind, Håkan. If we talk about cognition, which is the center of attention here in our pod and video, what does cognition mean to you? Is it important to you?
It's super important, of course. I think also when you're building teams, my philosophy is that skills are learnable, and but personality traits are at least much more slow moving and therefore actually the most important factor when you are assembling a team, whether that is a sports team or in business. Of course, you're looking for skills, and skills are the things that do stand out, but personality traits make a difference over time. So your cognitive capabilities, if you're lacking skills, if you have the right attitude and the right set of cognitive abilities, you will acquire those skills, as opposed to if you are well equipped skilled wise and but then needs to be flexible and change and move into a new set of skills. You may not take that step unless you have the right cognitive capability. So it's extremely important. And I think also it is what makes it so exciting is less evident. I mean, if you're looking for a high jumper in sports, for instance, and you can just by looking at the person see whether they have perhaps the characteristics to become a world record holder in high jumping or in basketball. But cognitive skills are not visible just by looking at a person. And I think also traditionally the tools to assess such cognitive skills have been less than perfect. So this is definitely an area where I'm super excited about it.
You've been talking here a little bit about flexibility, and if we move specifically to that, I think cognition and transformation, it means a change, and you work in projects, I believe, where transformation is absolutely, I mean, it's the key point, and that's where you change things, and it's your selling point also. What are your reflection about transformation, change, and flexibility then? What do you achieve that, and how do you build?
Well, a little bit first, perhaps to give context. We are helping the world-leading global forwarders to change their IT systems across the globe. And this could be in hundreds of countries, literally hundreds of countries. And so it's a change of IT systems, it's a change of process, but the intent and purpose of the change is actually a behavioral change. So to make the staff more efficient and deliver at a higher level of quality towards their customers. It starts then to be successful in that. It starts with a holistic view on things and an understanding of interdependencies. We have extremely skilled IT consultants. We have process excellence experts. We have people that are skilled in the organizational side of that. But unless you connect all of those things, and understand, as I said, interdependencies and understands the change management factor, you will not make that preferred move to a better behavior just by putting in a better system, a better process. So this cognitive flexibility you're referring to, Hans, is super important. And I think there are ways to support people in that, but of course also an important factor is to fill the slots, if you may, in a project organization with right-minded people, if I use that phrase. And traditionally that it is very difficult. Usually you put somebody in a leading spot because that person may have a vast experience of the old system, but that is not necessarily the most important factor to lead the global organization into the new behavior based on a new system.
Actually, I was listening to an interview previously with you, and I was thinking about if there are examples that you could give specifically of projects that have gone wrong or that have been particularly successful from this perspective.
There are plentiful of of successes and failures. I think you started this pod intro with using the word pleasure, so let's focus a bit more on the successes than the failures. There are, if I mention names, there are DSV and DHL, Global Forwarding. They have both conducted a very successful rollout of global IT systems. Sometimes these projects become successful because you've accumulated experience, and experience often comes from failures. I think both these giants had the global rollouts, gained a lot of experience where they've conducted projects that were not super successful. And I think the key learning boils down to the people factor. It is the factor that makes the difference. So once you learn character traits, what cognitive abilities to look for and seek for, and how you can nurture that in a team, you're much better off to make a successful transformation. I think also everybody is familiar with the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle. Maybe a one-liner, Anders.
Yeah.
Pareto is applicable on Pareto, meaning that if you then look at the 20% of the most important activities that deliver 80% of the value, well, if you take a look at those 20%, well, you will find that 20% of those are delivering 80% of that value, meaning that you can basically get half of the value, but just spending a percent of your time on the right activity. But more important than that is actually that if you fail to get the most important items right, you will never get anywhere near to the full value. And in that sort of top priority activity selection or top individual selections or top team selections, the problem is oftentimes that if you can't measure it, it's not part of your selection. So if there are 10 things you need to do right, and 3 of them are very difficult to quantify, they're off the list, but they may be the 3 most important ones. And that, I think, is the most important learning I have made, that since people and cognitive abilities of people and sort of the composition of a team, so that these cognitive abilities are the right set for a high performance team, are extremely difficult to measure. The focus on them is not sufficient. So that's often where you fail. Finally, you usually get the sort of the tech work stream right, the process definitions or design right, and the organizational structure right. And then you sit there wondering, why didn't we realize the full potential of this project? And it's down to people again, and again. And I think that we can all relate to that. We don't need to be leaders of big global complex projects. All key decisions we make in life is down to people, whether that is your life partner, a teammate in sports, building a sports team, in business, in your church, or wherever it is. The things that are most important for the result outcome, as well as the joy, pleasure, happiness, fulfillment, is down to people choices.
Super interesting. If I may just take a step back and kind of make some reflection about this, we who know a bit more of cognition than maybe the big majority, not more than the experts, but we kind of, as we say in the intro to this pod, we say that cognition is everything. Without our brains, we are just a piece of meat. That's kind of, it's a bit drastic to say, but it's true that without our brains, we're just a piece of meat. And thus the brain, and particularly the brain that is involved in the cognition that we can control, because we can control it, but first we need to understand it. This kind of emphasizes the importance of cognition in everything we do in everyday life, as private persons and as professional persons. And then if you look at what knowledge is there on the market, and it's surprisingly little of this very sharp science that is called cognitive neuroscience that has actually poured out to the market, and mostly it is the outspokers or interpreters of what the experts say that can explain this to us ordinary people, and they normally talk about our brain, the generic brain, meaning that we talk about the brain as if we all have the same brain. But this is where we want to add more and more information by actually talking to people about their cognitive profile, because we know that since long there are very sharp evidence-based tools that can measure the individual cognition, because we have an individual cognitive profile that makes us strong or less strong on very different things. And this is where behavioral patterns, this is where performance levels in different tasks, in different roles come into play. So it's amazing in one way. We think that there are so much knowledge and so sharp tools to actually understand mine and yours and ours cognitive function, and how this affects how we react to each other, how we collaborate, how we communicate, how we handle conflicts, etc. So going from the generic brain, which is there is some information coming up, and to the individual brain where we have these sharp tools, is something that we think is really important, because first, when we can see who we are, how we are cognitively programmed, we can start learning about it, and then we can start taking control, meaning we take responsibility for ourselves, we increase the top-down regulation, not being victims of what we think is something that is not changeable, but it's actually very controllable, but we need to understand it first. So I'm just thinking that coming back to transformation and change, which is driven by what you say, digitization of super big global organizations, we just think that this is such a powerful missing piece in any change, whether small, step-by-step, day-to-day change, or big changes involving a lot of people and even global organizations. And how do you see, because you kind of, if I read you between the lines, say that there is processes, organizational knowledge, systems are in place since long, but when it comes to the people understanding and the behavioral change, there is a lot to do. Do you have any more reflections around this?
Absolutely.
You see the potential that we're kind of seeing in
absolutely.
the cost of cognition.
You first of all, it is easier to popularize things when you're speaking generically, but it's so much less precise. It is actually the difference that makes the difference. When our consultancy network are engaged and supporting our customers in making the change, it is also a learning exercise on our side. The better we know of the specificities of that customer, the better equipped we are to help the customer. So generic advice is of course fine, but it's not good enough. If you make a metaphor or comparison in health or in training, of course, there are advice that applies for the majority of the population, but that is of no interest if you do not fit that profile. If I'm heavily overweight and you are underweight, Anders, the advice should be tailored to us. And the same with on the cognitive side. And most people we are alike. And I think also if you look at it on the genes, maybe we have 95% of the genes common with the pigs. Then somebody would probably write to this pod and say, well, Håkan has 99.9% of the genes common with the pigs. No, but the small difference is what makes the difference. And if you can, and I think that's also a little bit the challenge for people that are really deep in their expertise in cognition, that it is a bit more difficult to get the message across compared to somebody that is not that deep, but are able to package things on a generic level.
Håkan, do you work with these aspects? I mean, consciously in your group of your global network of consultants? I mean, is this something you talk about to treat people and organizations differently and not generically? Or?
Yes, and I think we learned it the hard way. I usually have sort of a corny way of selling that team up with me, because I've accumulated the biggest bags of mistakes in the industry. I've spent so long time in the industry in high pace of change, because I've been on I mean, usually both sides, but every side of the table in the logistics industry. I've been through numerous M&As, again, both sides of the table. So it's been a very high pace, constant change. And I've learned the hard way in that sense. And sometimes also, and I've consumed a lot of books, etc., but personal experience with that emotion attached to a failure makes a learning stick. That is very true. We have real life learning that cognitive profiles and the mix of cognitive profiles is super important. So when we are putting together a team to best support a global customer, obviously we're looking to bring the right skill sets to the table. But I would say that's a little bit the hygiene factor. So we have a period actually where we have meetings with the customer in order to learn as much as possible about the customer. There is something that is called cultural fit on a very high level, but I think at the end of the day, it's down to personal chemistry. Again, if we take the example that I would contract Anders as my coach, since I was so super pleased with his intro, and then we find out that the personal chemistry between Anders and me, or in that case, the example I mentioned where Anders were to work with my wife, is not a fit. Then it really doesn't matter if Anders have all the skills on the planet. It won't work. And I think tools to assess that would be super important. Now it's more, to be quite honest, on a trial and error basis. And I think for me, as I've been in this so long, I tried so much, I made so many errors and a few successes. I have learned what I call pattern recognition. There is familiarity in the situation. I've been there so many times. I've seen, I can, at least to some extent, predict whether two individuals will be a good team match together or not, because I've seen that pattern repeated again and again. But my pattern recognition is of course much better than somebody that is new to that and has not focused that much to that, but it's nowhere near what you could do if you have tool sets to correctly measure cognitive ability. And I think that is so super important in everything that is people related, of course, recruiting, of course, team building, of course, talent management, and everything in your private life.
I have one reflection talking about cultural fit and personal chemistry, that if we look at talent acquisition when we recruit people, we know it's very biased now, because we lack tools like these sharp cognitive tools going beneath the surface, looking more at abilities rather than the overt and observable behavior. So I think sometimes and many times what we are striving for, cultural fit, and then misinterpreting it as we need a personal chemistry, we need people that can work together. I think we can adopt, using cognitive insights, we can adopt a new view on this, because a lot of times we don't have chemistry because we don't understand the behavior of the other person, or that behavior disturbs us. With the cognitive tools, we can actually understand better why this behavior is there, and we can see the positive sides of it, and we can also share, okay, we know now why this is the case. For instance, your impulse control is very low, meaning you always burst out in reactions, and that disturbs me, and I think you're annoying and so on. But if you know it and you can get support to take care of that, and I know it and you know that I know, we can also talk about it. So we know it, we can talk about it, meaning we can quickly have a much better chance to actually work together and make use of the different abilities we actually bring to the table, rather than just saying, okay, I don't like your behavior, so we don't have a chemistry and we don't work together. So I think adding the cognitive perspective to the cultural issue and to the liking or not liking the chemistry can actually open up for much more collaboration and more mature conflict handling than is the case today. So I think we can actually add this piece to create cultural fit, to facilitate cultural fit.
That's very important. So when we're speaking about a perfect match in a team, it is not just sort of the chemistry alignment and the liking factor. It is, of course, also to bring a different set of skills and, in that sense, cognitive abilities, so that your strengths are compensating for my weaknesses and vice versa.
Yeah.
And particularly, if I have a better understanding of your cognitive abilities, then I think that helps me in the liking factor, because that's usually the difficulty, that you are complementing my strengths or my weaknesses with your strengths, but I'm annoyed by something in your behavior.
Exactly.
And then we don't get there.
We just feel the annoyance and we don't really know what we're getting, and so on. So we focus on the annoyance.
One other thing I would like to mention is the now we're speaking a lot about getting to know other people better, but getting to know yourself better is, of course, also crucially important. It is, I think that's back to Socrates and know thyself. And I think when I was making my first not so successful attempts at speaking at public events, I learned that there were basically two things that were more important than whatever the information I communicated. It was know myself and know thy audience. The better I understood my strengths and weaknesses, the better I could design my presentation. And of course, the better I understood the audience. Also, the most common mistake on the planet, you are targeting something, but for the wrong audience.
Maybe it's a sidetrack, and I have two questions there. Maybe I'm thinking about this aversion towards bias that you have, and I read that this was in 2020, but 63% of your elite consultants, that was what was said in the article at least, were women. Is that a result of working with these tools and trying to be unbiased? Because normally male dominance is quite high.
No, it's purely a factor of my attractiveness.
Yeah, of course, the pig.
Yes. So good you came to that point. That's the main.
I think there is a matching. I think it goes back to what I said, that it's easier then to change in terms of acquiring skill sets rather than personality traits. So if there are, which I believe there are, some biological differences between men and women, women are more on that HR side, that understanding side. I'm super privileged that I have some super experts in my team that have acquired the right skill set. But I think then when they bring in this female element, of course, it also helps if you work in a male-dominated industry. I think also we guys, we shape up. We may act a bit differently in a meeting if there are only men, as opposed to if there are a good mix, and particularly if there are a mix also on the senior most leadership level. My most recent customer is a small customer called UPS. UPS is led by a woman, and I think it is in the logistics industry. I think that there is actually a fantastic opportunity for women to make it all the way to the top. The change management, the softer element of the business is so important. And if we're speaking about transformation, then it's not down to how well engineered a truck is or something. It is down to the software element of people selection, people working together.
I just wanted to, coming back to the discussion about generic knowledge and specificity, one of the themes for this episode is the flexibility. And to come down from just talking about cognition on a generic level, we mentioned a few times the one ability called cognitive flexibility, and it's a very fascinating ability. If we try and explain it simply, it's about the ability to actually handle many parallel processes or pieces of information or themes and switch between them without actually losing focus on what is the most important aspect at hand. And we are very different in this. And as one interesting example, the scientists have proven that they made an experiment on a fairly large company with almost 3,000 employees, where they tested, among others, cognitive flexibility, and they correlated it with all the HR data about the education, the age, etc. And one of the KPIs they also correlated with was the days of sick leave. And there was a super strong correlation between the higher the cognitive flexibility, the lower the days of sick leave, which kind of indicates that it is kind of a predictor of transformation or change adaptability, the ability to actually robustness, you can say. So I think just using these tests to predict who can handle change or handle pressure, this is one interesting ability actually to look at for companies going through tough times or having to do transformation projects, etc. So would you see, Håkan, that this could be just, if you would use one specific test, could that be one factor that could be studied in a big transformation project, for instance?
I think it sounds super interesting. I think also in the times we're living, with the pace of change, it becomes increasingly more important. And I think due to the fact that the world was changing so slow, if we look at the hundreds of thousands of years before, that's the reason why that is not a super developed skill.
Yeah.
Gene pool was not rewarded for flexibility in the past, but basically you were rewarded for not being flexible, not taking any risks. But now we have a completely different situation. And I think that's also why we are slow to change, to adapt to change, so that inflexibility. But of course, then that's the difference that can make the difference.
Exactly. Then that's kind of coming back to what you said, that we are very similar in many ways, and the differences we have they can be considered nuances, but in some aspects these nuances may play a very big role in your capability of actually handling the shifting of things. And one thing we know for sure, as you say, is that we're living and as you also said in the introduction, Hans, we're living in times of both real but also perceived change, with all the information flow in the social media and so on. There is real change, but there is also perceived change. And it doesn't really matter because the brain perceives it as a change, and then it creates reactions and stress, and then sometimes feeling ill and going towards the need for healthcare and so on. So this is where the small differences may actually make a very big difference, just as you said, I think.
I want to learn more about that, but also I think what you said there is sort of a great news, because sometimes it's portrayed that it's success at the expense of health or happiness. What you portrayed there, Anders, was actually that these are not in conflict. That type of flexible cognitivity is both upping the odds for a successful outcome, as well as a more healthy individual in the project. Absolutely. So I think anything, and that is something that is extra appealing to me. If you can both have the achievement part and the fulfillment part, and not the one at the expense of the other. I would like to learn more about that.
We can have a separate episode with some of the experts on this to dive deep into it. That's super interesting. And one reflection there is that there are two groups of people. Those that are thrilled and really curious about testing and on getting to know themselves and others, and those who are a bit scared. To be kind of like the imposter syndrome, maybe what if I'm bad and so on. But this is not about good and bad. It's just to understand what comes easy for me, what is my talent, and what comes harder, and at what cost. And then the good news here is that we can control this. If we know it, we can actually find strategies. So meaning if I am a bit low in cognitive flexibility, it doesn't mean I have to suffer from it. If I know it, I can have tools and support to actually handle it, and then behave in a way that makes me robust. So it's not at all that you need to have it or, oh, sorry, you didn't have it. It's about knowing and using it. So that's also very, very good news. I think we should have that perspective when talking about cognitive tests, that it doesn't really matter as long as you know it and you know how to use it and to behave in order to optimize.
I'm hungry to learn. I think that is also sort of, if people become more hungry to learn on their cognitive abilities, there is a very positive outcome of that. I can see a little bit of similarity with health tests. I mean, the early detection is the most important factor to cure a disease. But most of us are a little bit reluctant to test to find out that we have some sort of illness. But it is actually, we should be 100% the other way around. And I think the same thing with a cognitive test. I mean, it will help you better understand yourself. And the better you understand yourself, the better the odds are that you will design your life in such a way that you improve the odds both for success achievement, but also for fulfillment and joy and passion.
And maybe it is particularly important in times of fast and rapid transformation. Even if you don't have that as high cognitive flexibility as others, you still know this and can adjust maybe.
Exactly. Get the insight and then support the people with the leadership and other support they need in order to actually want to and be able to go into that change that they're asked for. I really enjoyed this talk with you, Håkan. I think we could continue another few hours, but let's, if okay, we maybe come back to you down the line and who knows, investigate cognitive flexibility with you and some experts a bit more deeper.
I'm more than happy to do that. As I said, I think in a way also, if that would be my ending word, is that knowledge is not only power in terms of influence or in terms of driving change, it is crucially important for your own joy and passion in life. That is at least the experience I have. When I learn something in a sport, for instance, the more I know about the sport, the better I appreciate it. The more I know about basically any area of life, my appreciation grows in direct correlation with that. I will certainly follow your pod, whether you take the risk of inviting me again or not. So I will listen to the other guests anyhow.
Very good closing comment. Thank you very much for talking to us, and see you again.
Thank you very much, Håkan.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.